Montana Territory, 1887. The first rays of sunrise glinted off the glass lens as Penelope Monroe adjusted her camera on the rickety tripod. She brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face, tucking it back into her otherwise neatly arranged updo. At 23, she had already made a name for herself in Philadelphia's photography circles, but the West, the real West, remained her unconquered ambition. "Just a moment longer," she murmured, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. The mountains loomed before her, majestic and indifferent to her presence. This was what she had come for. To capture the untamed grandeur that Eastern newspapers only hinted at, Penelope checked her pocket watch. She had precisely 2 hours before she needed to return to Whiteridge, the small but growing town where she had taken a room above the general store. 2 hours to capture what she hoped would be her finest work yet. She had come west firmly believing that a woman must forge her own path, that depending on others, especially men, was a recipe for disappointment and heartbreak. Her father's abandonment when she was 12 and her former fiancé Edward's betrayal had cemented this belief. The camera became her shield, allowing her to observe life without participating in its messier emotions. Through her lens, she controlled what was seen and what remained hidden, including her own heart. As she waited for the perfect light, the crunch of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A rider appeared, silhouetted against the brightening sky. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here alone," the stranger called, his voice carrying across the distance. "Mountain lions have been spotted in this area." Penelope straightened, her green eyes flashing with annoyance. "I assure you, sir, I am perfectly capable of—" The words died on her lips as the rider came closer. He couldn't have been more than 25, with clear blue eyes that matched the Montana sky and light brown hair that curled slightly under his Stetson. His face was youthful yet weathered by the elements, with only a hint of stubble along his strong jawline. Unlike the rough men she'd encountered in town, his expression held no condescension, only genuine concern. "Riley Xavier," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "foreman at the Silvercrest Ranch." He dismounted in one fluid motion. "And you'd be the photographer from back east. Folks in town have been talking." "Penelope Monroe," she replied, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite his disarming smile. "And I doubt a mountain lion would approach with all this equipment clattering about." Riley scanned the horizon. "They're hungrier than usual this season. Droughts push the game higher into the mountains." He nodded toward her camera. "Never seen one of those contraptions up close." "It's a Eastman dry plate camera," Penelope said, professional pride momentarily overriding her annoyance at the interruption. "Far more practical than the wet plate process for field work." Riley studied the camera with genuine interest. "So you capture what's already there, preserve it somehow." "In essence, yes," Penelope replied, surprised by his curiosity. "I'm documenting the West for Eastern publications. People want to see what lies beyond the Mississippi." Riley's expression shifted, something like disappointment crossing his features. "And what exactly are you showing them?" "The truth," she said firmly. "The landscape, the settlements, the realities of frontier life." He looked at the mountain range, then back at her camera. "With all due respect, Miss Monroe, that box of yours can only capture shadows. The real West isn't something you can fix on a piece of paper." Penelope felt a flash of indignation. "Photography is not merely about shadows, Mr. Xavier. It's about preserving moments, creating a historical record." "Maybe so," he conceded, "but there's a difference between seeing and understanding." He mounted his horse again. "If you're intent on staying out here, at least take this." He handed her a small revolver from his saddlebag. "It's loaded, point and squeeze if anything approaches that shouldn't." Before she could protest, he added, "I'll be back this way in 2 hours." Silvercrest has grazing rights in the valley beyond that ridge. With a tip of his hat, he rode off, leaving Penelope holding the revolver and wondering why his words bothered her so much. She had come to photograph the West, not to be lectured on what her camera could or couldn't capture. Yet as she returned to her work, Riley Xavier's words echoed in her mind, the difference between seeing and understanding. It was precisely what she prided herself on, seeing beyond the surface to the essence of things. What unsettled her most was the realization that for a brief moment she had been more interested in the man than in the landscape she had traveled 2,000 miles to photograph. 2 weeks later, Penelope stood in her makeshift darkroom at the back of Whiteridge's general store, carefully developing her latest plates. The images were good, technically perfect, in fact, but something was missing. They didn't convey the overwhelming scale, the dizzying vastness she experienced when standing before the mountains. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Monroe," it was Mrs. Holloway, the store owner's wife. "There's a gentleman here to see you." Penelope quickly covered her chemical trays. "Please tell them I'll be out momentarily." She removed her apron, checked her appearance in the small mirror hanging on the wall, and smoothed her navy blue skirt. She had chosen practical clothing for her western expedition, tailored skirts that stopped just above her ankles, paired with sturdy boots and crisp white shirtwaists. Today she wore a fitted jacket in the same navy as her skirt, with subtle embroidery along the lapels, a concession to fashion she allowed herself even in the frontier. When she emerged into the store's main room, she was surprised to find Riley Xavier, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable among the bolts of fabric and jars of preserves. "Mr. Xavier," she acknowledged, trying to ignore the unexpected leap of her pulse. "I believe I still have your revolver. Fortunately, I had no occasion to use it." "Actually, that's not why I'm here," he said. "The Silvercrest is hosting a cattle drive next week. Thought it might interest you for your photographs. It's not often you see 500 head moved all at once." Penelope couldn't hide her interest. "That sounds precisely like the kind of authentic Western experience my publishers are seeking." "It's a 3-day ride," Riley added. "The ranch owner, Mr. Harrington, said you're welcome to join us if you'd like to document it. His wife insisted we offer you proper accommodations at the ranch beforehand." Penelope hesitated. 3 days with cowboys on a cattle drive was far different from her solitary excursions around Whiteridge. Yet the opportunity was too valuable to pass up. "I would be delighted to accept Mr. Harrington's invitation," she said. "When should I be ready?" "I can send a wagon for you tomorrow afternoon if that suits." Riley's expression remained neutral, but Penelope thought she detected a hint of surprise, as if he hadn't expected her to agree so readily. "Tomorrow afternoon would be perfect. Thank you for thinking of me, Mr. Xavier." He nodded, replaced his hat, and headed for the door. Then he paused. "Miss Monroe." "Yes. Bring sturdy clothes. Where we're going isn't for fancy Eastern dresses." Penelope bristled. "I assure you, Mr. Xavier, I didn't cross half the continent without preparing for its conditions." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Just looking out for you, Miss Monroe, till tomorrow then." As he left, Mrs. Holloway approached with a knowing smile. My, Penelope, it seems you've caught young Riley's eye." "Nonsense," Penelope replied quickly. "This is purely professional. The Silvercrest is one of the largest ranches in the territory. It would be remiss of me not to document their operation." "If you say so, dear Mrs. Holloway said, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "But I've known Riley Xavier for 5 years, and I've never seen him personally escort a lady to the Silvercrest before." Penelope busied herself rearranging her photography supplies to hide the flush creeping up her neck. She wasn't here for romance. She had learned the hard way that a woman must choose between professional success and personal attachment. Her camera was reliable, constant, unlike people who inevitably disappointed or abandoned you. Yet as she prepared her equipment that evening, she found herself wondering what Riley Xavier saw when he looked at the land he worked. What was the West to someone who lived it rather than observed it? Perhaps the cattle drive would provide not just photographs for her portfolio, but answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask. The Silvercrest Ranch sprawled across a valley framed by mountains, its white-painted buildings gleaming in the afternoon sun. From her seat in the wagon, Penelope could see cowboys moving between corrals, horses grazing in nearby paddocks, and in the distance, the dark shapes of cattle dotting the hillsides. "It's breathtaking," she admitted as Riley helped her down from the wagon. "Mr. Harrington started with nothing but a claim and 50 head of cattle 15 years ago," Riley said, pride evident in his voice. "Now the Silvercrest runs nearly 2,000 head with 20 full-time hands." A stately woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the main house. "You must be Miss Monroe. I'm Vivian Harrington. Welcome to Silvercrest." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Harrington." Penelope smiled, instantly warmed by the woman's genuine welcome. "Riley, show Miss Monroe to the guest cabin after you've brought her things. Dinner is at 6 sharp." With a friendly nod, Mrs. Harrington returned to the house. "The guest cabin is just behind the main house," Riley explained, gathering Penelope's trunks. "It's simple but comfortable." "I'm sure it will be perfectly adequate," Penelope replied, following him along a well-worn path. The cabin was indeed simple, a single room with a bed, washstand, small table and wood-burning stove, but scrupulously clean with fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table. "The pump for water is just outside," Riley said, setting down her trunks, "and there's a proper washroom behind the main house. Mrs. Harrington insisted on indoor plumbing when they built it." "It's lovely," Penelope said, genuinely impressed by the comfort offered in such a remote location. Riley lingered in the doorway. "The drive starts at dawn day after tomorrow. Tomorrow I thought I might show you around the ranch, let you get some photographs before we head out." "That would be wonderful," Penelope replied, surprised by his thoughtfulness. "I'd like to capture the full scope of the operation." Riley nodded. "I'll let you get settled then. See you at dinner." After he left, Penelope unpacked her camera equipment first, carefully checking that nothing had been damaged during the journey. Then she changed into a fresh shirtwaist and brushed her hair before pinning it back up. As she did, she found herself wondering what Riley would think of her hair if she wore it down, then immediately chided herself for the thought. Dinner at the Harrington household was a revelation. Unlike the stilted formal affairs she knew from Philadelphia, conversation flowed easily around the large table that accommodated not just the Harringtons and their 3 children, but also Riley and 2 other senior hands. "So, Miss Monroe, what brings a lady photographer all the way to Montana?" asked George Harrington, a robust man with a booming voice and kind eyes. "I believe the West is being misrepresented in Eastern publications," Penelope explained. "Either romanticized beyond recognition or portrayed as lawless and savage. I want to show the truth, the beauty, the hardship, the everyday reality." "Noble aim," Mr. Harrington nodded. "Though I suspect the everyday reality might disappoint those looking for gunfights on Main Street." "That's precisely my point," Penelope said earnestly. "People should know that the West is being settled by ordinary families seeking opportunity, not just desperados and gold seekers." "You sound like Riley, Mrs. Harrington said with a smile. "He's always saying the dime novels have it all wrong." Riley looked slightly embarrassed. "I just think if people back east knew what it was really like, more good folks might come. We need teachers, doctors, craftsmen, not just more cowboys and prospectors." Penelope studied him with new interest. "That's exactly what I hope my photographs will accomplish, Mr. Xavier." "Call me Riley," he said. "Everyone does." "Then you must call me Penelope," she replied, surprised by her own forwardness. The next morning, Riley met her outside the guest cabin just as sunrise painted the mountains gold. He sat astride a chestnut gelding, leading a gentle-looking dappled mare. "Thought we'd cover more ground on horseback," he explained. "This is Daisy, she's steady as they come." Penelope hesitated. "I should warn you, my riding experience is limited to very sedate park trails in Philadelphia." Riley's expression remained encouragingly neutral. Daisy could be ridden by a child. "She'll follow my horse without you even directing her, but if you're uncomfortable." "No," Penelope said firmly, gathering her courage. "I can manage." She wore her most practical outfit, a split riding skirt she'd had made specifically for this journey, paired with a sturdy jacket and boots. Her camera equipment was packed in specially designed leather cases that hung from the saddle. With Riley's assistance, she mounted Daisy, taking a moment to adjust to the unfamiliar sensation. The saddle was different from the side saddles she was accustomed to, but the split skirt allowed her to sit comfortably astride. "We'll take it slow," Riley promised as they set off. True to his word, they proceeded at an easy pace, with Riley pointing out the boundaries of the ranch and explaining its operations. Penelope was struck by the pride in his voice when he spoke of the Silvercrest. "You seem to care deeply about this place," she observed as they paused on a ridge overlooking the valley. "The Harringtons gave me a chance when I had nothing," Riley said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I was 18, just a kid who could ride and knew cattle. Mr. Harrington hired me anyway, taught me everything about running a ranch. When his foreman retired 3 years ago, he trusted me to step up." "That's impressive," Penelope said sincerely. "You couldn't have been much more than 22. Riley shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "What about you? How does a young woman become a photographer in Philadelphia?" Penelope considered her answer carefully. "My father was a photographer before he left. He taught me the basics. After he was gone, I convinced Mr. Gladstone at the studio where he worked to take me on as an assistant. Eventually, I learned enough to strike out on my own." She didn't mention the years of struggle, the doors closed in her face because she was a woman, or the loneliness of building a career without family support. Those were shadows her camera never captured, the parts of herself she kept hidden. "That took courage," Riley said simply. Penelope was struck by his understanding. Most men would have focused on the impropriety of a woman in such a profession, not the strength it required. "I'd like to photograph the herd," she said, changing the subject, "and perhaps some of the cowboys at work if they wouldn't mind." Riley's expression brightened. "I know just the spot." He led her to where several cowboys were working with the cattle being prepared for the drive, sorting them into groups and checking for any signs of illness or injury. Riley introduced her to the men, who were initially shy about being photographed but soon warmed to the idea. Penelope worked quickly, setting up her camera to capture the cowboys on horseback, the fluid motion as they separated cattle from the herd, the concentration on their faces. Riley stayed nearby, occasionally suggesting better vantage points or explaining what the men were doing. "These are going to be wonderful," Penelope said as she packed up her equipment after several hours. "So much more authentic than the staged photographs I've seen in some publications." "Glad to hear it," Riley replied, "though I still say there's more to the West than what fits in that box of yours." "Such as?" Penelope challenged. Riley considered for a moment. The sound of 500 cattle moving across the plain, the smell of sage after rain, the feeling when a thunderstorm rolls in and you're 3 days' ride from shelter. He met her gaze directly. "The way the stars out here make you feel both insignificant and part of something enormous at the same time." Penelope was momentarily speechless. His words painted pictures more vivid than any photograph. "Perhaps you should be a writer, not a cowboy," she finally said, her tone lighter than she felt. Riley laughed. "Just a cowboy who pays attention, Miss Monroe." "Just a cowboy who pays attention." That evening, Penelope developed some of the plates she'd exposed during the day, working in a small shed the Harringtons had cleared for her use. As the images appeared in the chemical bath, she felt the familiar satisfaction of having captured something real and true, but Riley's words lingered. There was indeed more to the West than what her camera could record. The question was whether she was willing to experience it directly, rather than from behind her lens. The cattle drive began before dawn, in a chaos of dust, noise, and motion that both thrilled and intimidated Penelope. 500 cattle bellowed and jostled as cowboys on horseback guided them into a moving column that stretched for nearly a mile. "Stay close to the chuck wagon for now," Riley instructed her, his attention divided between her and the herd. "Once we're moving steadily, I'll come back and you can ride alongside me for some photographs." Penelope nodded, clutching her camera cases protectively as the wagon jolted into motion. The cook, a weathered man named Hank who had regaled her with stories at dinner the previous night, gave her a sympathetic smile. "First drive's always overwhelming," he said, "but there's a rhythm to it." "You'll say." True to his word, Riley returned after about an hour, the initial chaos having settled into a more organized procession. "Ready for a closer look?" he asked, extending his hand to help her onto Daisy, who was tethered to the back of the wagon. They rode along the edge of the herd, keeping a safe distance but close enough for Penelope to appreciate the scale of the operation. Riley explained how the cowboys were positioned, point riders at the front guiding the direction, swing riders along the sides keeping the herd together, and drag riders at the back urging stragglers forward. It's remarkable, Penelope said, her voice raised to be heard over the constant lowing of cattle and the creak of leather. So many moving parts, yet everything flows. Riley nodded. When it works right, it's like a dance. When it doesn't, he trailed off, scanning the horizon with a slight frown. What is it? Penelope asked, following his gaze. Probably nothing. Weather's changing, though, feel that. Now that he mentioned it, Penelope noticed a shift in the air, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying a faint scent she couldn't identify. Is it going to rain? She asked. Maybe, but that's not what I'm worried about. Riley's expression remained calm, but Penelope sensed his concern. Lightning's the real danger. One strike near the herd could cause a stampede. A stampede? Penelope couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. Riley's expression softened. Don't worry, we've dealt with worse. But maybe we should get some of those photographs while the light's still good. Penelope seized the opportunity, setting up her camera at various points along the drive. She captured cowboys silhouetted against the vast sky, cattle flowing like a river across the plain, the chuck wagon with Hank perched on its seat. Riley stayed with her, occasionally offering suggestions or explanations that enhanced her understanding of what she was seeing. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had indeed gathered on the horizon. Riley's expression grew more concerned as he studied them. We need to find shelter, he decided. There's an old line cabin about 2 miles east, not ideal but better than being caught in the open. He rode ahead to confer with the other cowboys, and soon the entire procession was changing direction, heading toward a stand of trees barely visible in the distance. The first fat raindrops began to fall when they were still a mile from shelter. By the time the line cabin came into view, the rain had become a downpour and lightning flashed ominously in the distance. Take Penelope to the cabin, Riley shouted to Hank over the storm. We'll get the herd settled in that draw where there's some protection from the wind. Hank nodded, helping Penelope down from her horse and rushing her toward the small wooden structure barely visible through the curtain of rain. Her photography equipment was quickly transferred to the relative dryness of the cabin, a Spartan one-room affair with a small stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot in the corner. It ain't much, but it'll keep you dry, Hank said, shaking water from his hat. I best get back and help the boys. They'll have their hands full keeping them cattle from scattering in this weather. Will they be all right? Penelope couldn't keep the worry from her voice. Riley knows what he's doing, Hank assured her. Man's got an instinct for trouble, probably why he spotted that storm before any of us. He lit a lamp in the small stove, adding, Stay put. Someone will come for you when it's safe. After Hank left, Penelope stood uncertainly in the middle of the cabin, water dripping from her soaked clothing onto the rough wooden floor. Outside, the storm had intensified, wind howling around the cabin's corners and rain lashing against the single small window. She thought of Riley and the others out in this deluge, working to keep the cattle calm, and felt a twist of concern in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. Then she chided herself for the emotion. These men knew their business. They had surely weathered such storms before. Still, she found herself going to the window every few minutes, straining to see through the rain, hoping for some sign of their return. An hour passed, then 2. The storm showed no signs of abating. She had changed into dry clothes from her trunk, made tea using water from a barrel in the corner, and was attempting to distract herself by organizing her exposed plates when the door finally burst open. Riley stood in the doorway, drenched to the skin, his hair plastered to his head and mud caking his clothes. But it was the look in his eyes that stopped Penelope's breath, a wild, haunted expression that transformed his face. Are you all right? She asked, hurrying toward him. He seemed to gather himself with effort. Fine, we lost some cattle in the confusion, but no men, thank God. He stepped inside, closing the door against the ongoing storm. The others are setting up camp in the trees. They'll be sheltered enough there. I came to check on you. I'm perfectly fine, Penelope assured him, but you're soaked through, you should get warm. Riley nodded distractedly, his gaze darting around the cabin as if searching for hidden dangers. He removed his dripping coat and hat, hanging them on pegs by the door, but remained standing, tense and alert. Riley, Penelope said gently, concerned by his behavior. What happened out there? He ran a hand through his wet hair, leaving it standing in spikes. Lightning spooked the herd. We nearly had a stampede on our hands. I've seen what 500 panicked cattle can do, he shuddered visibly. 2 years ago we lost 3 men that way. Understanding dawned. You were worried it would happen again. Always am during a storm like this. His voice was tight. You never forget the sound, the ground shaking under your horse. Knowing if you fall, you'll be trampled. Without thinking, Penelope took his hand. It was ice cold and trembling slightly. But you prevented it this time. Everyone's safe. Riley looked down at their joined hands, something vulnerable crossing his features. This time, he echoed. They stood like that for a moment, connected by touch and shared understanding. Then Riley seemed to remember himself, gently withdrawing his hand. I should get back to the men, he said, though he made no move toward the door. In this. Penelope gestured toward the window, where rain still lashed against the glass. You said yourself they're sheltered. Surely you can wait until the worst passes. As if in answer, a violent gust of wind rattled the cabin, and the lamp flickered ominously. Perhaps you're right, Riley conceded. He moved to the stove, holding his hands out to the meager warmth. The drive will be delayed a day or two now. The ground will be too muddy to move cattle safely tomorrow. I'm sorry if my presence has complicated things, Penelope said, suddenly conscious that she was an outsider in this world of hard work and real dangers. Riley shook his head firmly. You haven't. This is the West, Penelope. Weather dictates everything, not schedules or plans. The use of her first name, spoken in his low voice, sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. Tell me about the ranch, she said, pulling the second chair closer to the stove and motioning for him to sit. How did you come to work there? Riley hesitated, then sat down, his tall frame making the crude chair seem even smaller. It's not a particularly interesting story. I disagree, Penelope said. Everything about this land and the people who choose it fascinates me. Something in her tone must have convinced him because he began to speak, haltingly at first, then with more confidence. I grew up in Kansas, son of a farmer. My mother died when I was 14 and my father followed 3 years later. Farm was mortgaged to the hilt, so I sold what I could and headed west with nothing but a decent horse and the clothes on my back. He stared into the stove's small fire. Worked odd jobs all the way to Montana. Was about to give up and head back east when Mr. Harrington hired me. He seems like a good man, Penelope observed. The best I've known, Riley agreed. Treats his hands fair, stands by his word, and misses. Harrington's been like a mother to half the young men who have worked there. Including you? Penelope asked gently. A smile softened Riley's features. Including me. They invited me to Christmas dinner that first year when I had nowhere to go. Been family ever since. Penelope felt a pang of envy. Her own holidays were spent alone in her small apartment above her studio, developing plates or editing her work. The community Riley described, imperfect but supportive, was something she had never experienced. And your family? Riley asked. You mentioned your father was a photographer. Penelope stiffened slightly. Yes. He taught me the technical aspects before he left. My mother died when I was young. I have no siblings. Left? Riley pressed gently. Penelope rarely discussed her personal history, preferring to keep the focus on her work. But something about the intimacy of the cabin, cut off from the world by the storm, made her willing to share what she usually kept hidden. He abandoned us, my mother and me, for another woman. When my mother died of typhoid a year later, he was nowhere to be found. Her voice remained steady through long practice. I was taken in by my mother's sister, who made it clear I was an unwelcome burden. When I was 16, I left to apprentice at Mr. Gladstone's studio. That's why you became a photographer? Riley asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. To follow in his footsteps despite what he did. Penelope had never considered this perspective. Perhaps because the camera gives me control. When I look through the lens, I decide what's included in the frame and what remains outside it. Nothing unexpected can intrude. As soon as the words left her mouth, she realized how revealing they were. Riley's expression shifted to one of understanding. And in life you can't control what intrudes, he said softly. Exactly. Penelope was surprised by his insight. Most people don't understand that. Out here you learn quickly that control is an illusion, Riley said. The weather, the land, the animals, they all have their own plans, you adapt or you break. Is that why you stay? Despite the dangers and hardships. Riley considered her question seriously. Partly, but mostly because out here a man is judged by what he does, not where he came from or who his father was. I started with nothing but Mr. Harrington saw something in me worth investing in. Now I run his cattle operation and own a small spread of my own. Pride colored his voice. That wouldn't have happened back east. You own land? Penelope asked, surprised. 160 acres adjoining Silvercrest. Started building a cabin there last year. His expression grew distant. It's not much yet, but someday. He trailed off, and Penelope found herself wondering what dreams he held for that piece of land. A home, a family, the thought sent an unexpected pang through her chest. The storm continued through the night, forcing Riley to remain at the cabin. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their respective worlds that gradually revealed more than either had intended. Riley described cattle drives gone wrong, winters so harsh they lost a quarter of the herd, and the satisfaction of seeing spring calves dotting the meadows. Penelope told him about struggling to be taken seriously in a male-dominated profession, the technical challenges of outdoor photography, and the letters she received from women inspired by her work to seek their own unconventional paths. As the small stove burned low, Riley insisted Penelope take the cot while he made do with a bedroll on the floor. Despite her protests, he was firm. I've slept on much worse, believe me, he said with a smile that made her heart beat faster. In the darkness, listening to the storm and Riley's steady breathing across the room, Penelope found herself confronting an uncomfortable truth. She was developing feelings for this cowboy that went beyond professional interest or friendly appreciation. Feelings that threatened the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. The realization troubled her sleep, filling it with dreams of being trapped behind her camera, unable to step into the scenes she captured, watching life pass by without truly experiencing it. Morning brought weak sunlight and the realization that the storm had passed. The drive resumed the following day, with Riley again making time to ride alongside Penelope, explaining aspects of cattle ranching she would never have understood on her own. She found herself looking at the landscape through his eyes, not just as a series of potential photographs, but as a living, breathing ecosystem that demanded respect and offered rewards to those who understood its rhythms. By the time they reached the railroad town where the cattle would be loaded onto trains bound for eastern markets, Penelope had amassed an impressive collection of photographs documenting every aspect of the drive. But more importantly, she had begun to question whether her camera was truly capturing the essence of the West or merely its surface. The realization crystallized on their last evening on the trail. The cattle were corralled near the railroad pens, awaiting loading in the morning. The cowboys had been paid their bonuses and most had headed to town to celebrate, but Riley had remained behind to ensure everything was in order for the morning. Penelope found him sitting alone by a small fire, staring into the flames. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, painting everything in gold and amber hues that made her fingers itch for her camera. But for once she resisted the urge to hide behind her lens. "May I join you?" she asked. Riley looked up, surprise giving way to a warm smile that reached his eyes. Of course. Penelope sat beside him on the log he was using as a seat, closer than propriety might dictate, but not caring in this moment, far from society's watchful eyes. "The drive was successful?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Very, Mr. Harrington will be pleased." Riley poked at the fire with a stick. "Did you get what you came for, your photographs?" "Yes," Penelope said, then hesitated. "And no." Riley raised an eyebrow. "How's that?" "I captured everything I intended to, the cattle, the cowboys, the landscape." She gestured toward the horizon where the last light was fading. "But I'm beginning to think you were right that first day. The camera can only capture shadows." "What changed your mind?" Riley asked quietly. Penelope considered her answer carefully. "Experiencing it firsthand, I suppose. Being in the middle of it rather than observing from a distance, feeling the rhythm of the days, the exhaustion, the satisfaction." She looked at him directly. "And listening to you talk about this land." Riley held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. What will you tell your Eastern readers then? The truth as best I can, but I'll make it clear that to truly understand the West they must experience it themselves. She smiled slightly. Perhaps I'll encourage more teachers and doctors to make the journey, as you suggested. I'd like that, Riley said softly. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled around them, the only light coming from the small fire and the vast canopy of stars overhead. Penelope had never seen stars so brilliant, so numerous that they seemed to crowd the sky. You were right about the stars too, she said, her voice hushed. They do make you feel both insignificant and part of something enormous. Riley looked up at the night sky, then back at her. There's a lot out here worth experiencing, Penelope. Things no camera can capture. The way he said her name with a gentleness that belied his strength made her breath catch. Without her camera between them, without the barrier she usually maintained, Penelope felt exposed and strangely, wonderfully free. I'm beginning to see that, she whispered. For a moment it seemed he might reach for her hand, might close the small distance between them, but instead he stood, offering her a hand up. It's getting late. We should head back to camp. As they walked side by side through the starlit night, Penelope wondered if she had imagined the moment of connection, or if Riley, like her, was fighting against feelings that threatened carefully constructed defenses. The next morning brought the chaos of loading cattle onto train cars and the cowboys' preparations to return to the ranch. Penelope found herself swept up in final photographs and farewells, with little opportunity for private conversation with Riley. When the moment came to part ways, she to continue her photographic journey through Montana before returning east, he to lead the men back to Silvercrest, Riley approached her as she stood beside the stagecoach that would take her to her next destination. I hope you found what you were looking for, he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that belied his tone. I found more than I expected, Penelope replied honestly. Thank you for showing me the West through your eyes, Riley. He nodded, seeming to struggle with something he wanted to say. Finally, he simply touched the brim of his hat. Safe travels, Miss Monroe. The return to formality stung more than Penelope expected. And you, Mr. Xavier. As the stagecoach pulled away, Penelope watched Riley grow smaller in the distance, a solitary figure standing straight and tall against the vast landscape. She had photographs of him, candid shots taken during the drive when he was focused on his work, but none captured the essence of the man she had come to admire. The quiet strength, the unexpected poetry in his observations, the way his presence made her feel simultaneously safe and exhilaratingly alive. For the first time in her career, Penelope questioned whether photography was truly her calling, or merely a shield she had hidden behind, observing life without risking the pain of participation. The question haunted her over the next 3 weeks as she traveled to other Montana settlements, photographing mining operations, small homesteads, and the construction of the Northern Pacific Railroad. Her work was as technically proficient as ever, but something had changed. She found herself increasingly dissatisfied with the distance between herself and her subjects, longing for the connection she had briefly experienced during the cattle drive. When she received a telegraph from her publisher in Philadelphia expressing enthusiasm about her photographs and requesting her return for an exhibition of her Western work, Penelope felt an unexpected reluctance. The thought of leaving Montana, of never seeing Riley Xavier again, created a hollow feeling in her chest that no professional success could fill. Yet what alternative was there? Her career, her independence, her very identity were tied to her work in Philadelphia, and Riley had made no indication that he wished for her to stay. Their connection, whatever it had been, was clearly not strong enough to overcome the practical realities of their different worlds. Still, as her departure date approached, Penelope found herself drawn back to Whiteridge, ostensibly to gather her remaining belongings from Mrs. Holloway's store, but in truth hoping for news of Silvercrest and its foreman. "Oh, you just missed him," Mrs. Holloway said when Penelope inquired casually about Riley. "He was in town yesterday picking up supplies. Mentioned he's taking some time off to work on his own place." His land near Silvercrest, Penelope remembered. Mrs. Holloway nodded. Been saving for years to build something proper there. Word is he's finally doing it. She studied Penelope's face. You made quite an impression on him, you know. Never seen Riley so talkative as when he was telling folks about your photographs of the cattle drive. Penelope felt a flush creep up her neck. He was very helpful, a knowledgeable guide. Mrs. Holloway replied noncommittally. When do you leave for the East? 3 days, Penelope said, the words feeling leaden in her mouth. My publisher is arranging an exhibition of my Western photographs. Congratulations, Mrs. Holloway said sincerely, though I must say we'll miss you around here. Brought some excitement to our little town, you did. As Penelope prepared to leave, Mrs. Holloway added casually, Riley's place is about 5 miles north of Silvercrest, if you were wondering. Just follow the creek past the old Miller homestead. Penelope spent a restless night debating what to do with this information. The sensible choice was to leave as planned, return to her established career, and file away her memories of Riley Xavier as a pleasant interlude in her Western adventure. The very qualities that had drawn her to him, his rootedness in this land, his commitment to building something lasting here, made any future between them impractical. Yet as dawn broke, she found herself hiring a horse from the local livery stable, packing her camera almost as an afterthought, and heading north out of town. She told herself she merely wanted to say a proper goodbye, to thank him for his insights that had so enriched her understanding of the West. Perhaps she would take one final photograph of him on his own land, a fitting conclusion to her Montana portfolio. The ride took longer than expected, the trail becoming less distinct as she followed the creek misses. Holloway had mentioned, when she finally spotted smoke rising from behind a stand of pines, Penelope felt a flutter of nervousness. What if he resented her intrusion? What if the connection she had felt existed only in her imagination? The cabin that came into view as she rounded the pines was still a work in progress, walls and roof complete, but porch unfinished and windows not yet installed. Riley stood in front, splitting logs with an axe, his back to her. The rhythmic swing of the axe, the flex of muscle beneath his shirt, the total absorption in his task, it was a scene straight from her imaginings of the authentic West. She dismounted quietly, but the horse's movement caught Riley's attention. He turned, axe still in hand, surprise evident on his face. Penelope, he said, as if not quite believing his eyes. I'm sorry to intrude, she began, suddenly unsure of her decision to come. Mrs. Holloway mentioned you were working on your place, and I wanted to say goodbye properly before I leave. Riley set down the axe and walked toward her, his expression unreadable. When do you go? 3 days, Penelope replied. I'm expected in Philadelphia for an exhibition of my work. He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. I'm glad you came. I was afraid I'd missed my chance to see you again. The simple honesty of his statement gave Penelope courage. I couldn't leave without seeing your land, you spoke of it so fondly during the drive. Riley's face brightened. Would you like to see it properly? There's a view from the ridge that shows most of the property. I'd like that very much, Penelope said, relieved by his welcome. They walked side by side, Riley pointing out his plans for the land, where he would build a barn, which meadows would be fenced for horses, where an orchard might someday grow. His enthusiasm was infectious, painting a vivid picture of the home he envisioned. At the ridge, they stopped to take in the panoramic view. The land rolled away before them, a patchwork of meadows, stands of pine, and the silver thread of the creek winding through it all. In the distance, the mountains rose, still capped with snow even in summer. It's beautiful, Penelope said sincerely. I can see why you love it. It's not much yet, Riley said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice, but someday. You'll build something wonderful here, Penelope finished for him. I can already see it. Riley turned to her, his blue eyes intense. Can you? Because lately all I can see when I look at this land is what's missing from my plans. What's that? Penelope asked, her heart beating faster. Someone to share it with, his voice was low, almost a whisper, someone who sees beauty in the same things I do. The words hung between them, filled with meaning neither had dared express until now. Riley, Penelope began, not certain what she wanted to say, only knowing she couldn't leave without saying something. These past weeks have changed how I see everything, not just the West, but my own life. For years, I've hidden behind my camera, observing but never participating. It felt safer that way. And now, Riley asked gently, now I'm not sure that's enough anymore. Penelope took a deep breath. But my work, my independence, they're still important to me. I don't know how to reconcile that with what I feel when I'm with you. Riley stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. What if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a way to have both? Penelope shook her head, confusion evident in her expression. I don't understand. Whiteridge is growing, the railroad's bringing more settlers every month. They need a photographer for portraits, for documentation, for sending images back east to family. Riley's words came faster now, as if he'd thought this through carefully. You could establish a studio there, continue your artistic work, and still. He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. And still what? Penelope prompted, hardly daring to breathe. And still be close enough that we could explore whatever this is between us, Riley finished, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm not asking you to give up your career, Penelope. I'm just asking for a chance to see if we might build something together. The possibility unfurled before her, a life that combined her professional passion with the personal connection she had always denied herself. Not a choice between independence and love, but a partnership that honored both. I would need to travel sometimes, she said slowly, allowing herself to consider it. There are stories across the West that still need telling. I understand that, Riley said earnestly. I wouldn't want to cage you, Penelope, just give you a place to come back to. The sincerity in his voice, the respect for her work and her independence, touched Penelope deeply. This was not the controlling possessiveness she had feared from men, but something entirely different, a recognition of her as a whole person with dreams of her own. I should still go to Philadelphia, she said finally. I have commitments to fulfill, arrangements to make if I were to relocate. Riley's face fell slightly, but he nodded. Of course, I understand. But Penelope continued, reaching for his hand, I could return. In the spring, perhaps, when travel is easier. Hope bloomed in Riley's eyes. You would consider it, coming back to Montana. Not just consider it, Penelope said, surprising herself with her certainty. Plan for it. If you're willing to wait that long. Riley's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I've been building this place slowly for years, Penelope. I can wait a few more months if it means the right person might share it with me someday. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. May I? He asked, his other hand moving hesitantly toward her waist. Penelope nodded, her throat too tight for words. As Riley drew her closer, she realized that for once she didn't wish for her camera to capture this moment. Some experiences were meant to be lived fully, not observed from behind a lens. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. In that kiss was a promise of possibility, of a life that combined independence with connection, adventure with belonging. When they finally parted, Penelope rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I should warn you, she said, looking up with a smile, I've never been particularly domestic. I can develop a photographic plate in complete darkness, but I'm liable to burn water. Riley laughed, the sound warming her more than the summer sun. And I should warn you that I wake before dawn every day and will likely track mud into any house I ever live in. His expression grew more serious. But I promise to respect your work, support your dreams, and never ask you to be less than who you are. Those are the only promises I need, Penelope replied honestly. They spent the remainder of the day together, Riley showing her every corner of his land, Penelope occasionally photographing scenes that caught her eye, but more often simply experiencing the moment without the barrier of her camera. As sunset approached, Riley built a small fire outside his half-finished cabin, and they sat beside it planning a future neither had imagined possible a month earlier. I'll write, Penelope promised as she prepared to leave. And send photographs of Philadelphia, though I warn you it's far less picturesque than this. I'll finish the cabin, Riley said. Add a room with good northern light for your work. The thought of a space designed specifically for her photography in a home built by Riley's hands brought unexpected tears to Penelope's eyes. I never thought I could have both, she admitted. My work and someone who understands it. Understands me. Riley brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. That's the real West, Penelope, not just the landscape or the cattle or the work, but the possibility of building something that's never existed before. Something that's yours alone. 3 days later, as the train carried her east, Penelope watched the Montana landscape recede with none of the relief she had anticipated, but rather a sense of anticipation for her return. In her trunk were the photographs that would form her exhibition, images of mountains and prairies, cowboys and cattle drives, small towns growing at the edge of wilderness. But more precious was the small daguerreotype in her handbag, a portrait of Riley standing before his half-built cabin, looking directly into the camera with clear eyes and an open smile. It was the only photograph she had taken of him facing the lens, aware of being observed rather than captured in a candid moment. In Philadelphia, Penelope's exhibition exceeded all expectations. Critics praised her technical skill and her unique perspective on Western life, noting that her photographs captured not just the grandeur of the landscape but the humanity of its inhabitants. Publishers approached her with offers for book projects, and her former mentor, Mr. Gladstone, grudgingly admitted that she had surpassed his teaching. Yet amidst the professional triumph, Penelope found herself changed. The distance she had always maintained from her subjects, from emotional entanglements, from life itself, no longer felt like protection but limitation. Riley's words echoed in her mind. The real West isn't something you can fix on a piece of paper. She now understood that the same was true of life. No photograph, however skillfully composed, could capture the feeling of being fully present in a moment, whether standing beneath a vast Montana sky or in the arms of someone who saw you completely and valued what they saw. When spring arrived, Penelope shocked Philadelphia society by announcing her permanent relocation to Montana territory. She sold her studio to a promising young female photographer she had mentored, packed her equipment and personal belongings, and boarded a westbound train with a lightness in her heart she had never before experienced. Riley met her at the station in Whiteridge, his face breaking into a smile that outshone the April sun when he spotted her through the crowd. They had exchanged letters throughout the winter, his telling of progress on the cabin and events at Silvercrest, hers describing her exhibition and preparations for the move west. But nothing compared to the moment he swept her into an embrace that defied propriety but felt perfectly right. "Welcome home," he whispered against her hair. The word home had never held much meaning for Penelope. Now it encompassed not just a place but a person, a relationship, a future being built together. The cabin, when they reached it after the drive from town, had been transformed. Windows gleamed in the spring sunlight, a proper porch wrapped around two sides, and inside, the rough space she remembered had become a comfortable home with simple but well-crafted furniture. True to his word, Riley had added a room with northern exposure, its windows positioned to provide the steady, indirect light ideal for photography. "Do you think it will suit your work?" he asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice as he showed her the space. Penelope turned to him, her heart full. "It's perfect, more than I ever imagined." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Silvercrest Ranch, with the Harringtons and their children, the ranch hands who had accompanied them on the cattle drive, and the townspeople of Whiteridge who had welcomed Penelope into their community. Mrs. Holloway wept openly, claiming credit for bringing them together, while Mr. Harrington spoke movingly of the family they had all become. Penelope wore a gown of pale blue silk ordered from Chicago, with wildflowers in her chestnut hair rather than a formal veil. Riley, unrecognizable to some in his new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows beneath the cottonwood trees where they had first truly connected during the storm. In the years that followed, Penelope established a thriving photography business in Whiteridge, taking portraits of families and documenting the town's growth while continuing her artistic work capturing the changing West. Her photographs appeared in national publications, and she occasionally traveled to other territories for specific projects, always returning to the home she and Riley continued to build together. Riley's careful management expanded their land holdings and cattle operation, though he remained foreman at Silvercrest until Mr. Harrington's retirement, when he stepped into the role of ranch manager with Penelope's full support. Their partnership proved that love didn't require sacrifice of individual dreams but rather created space for both to flourish. When their first child was born, a daughter with Penelope's green eyes and Riley's steady temperament, they named her Victoria, for victory over the false beliefs that had nearly kept them apart. A son followed 2 years later, growing into a boy who combined his father's love of the land with his mother's artistic eye. Penelope never regretted her decision to build a life in Montana. The moments her camera captured, cattle drives and railroad construction, town celebrations and quiet family scenes, formed a visual record of the West's transformation. But the richest experiences remained those that existed beyond the frame, teaching Victoria to develop her first photograph in the darkroom Riley had built, watching their son fall asleep in his father's arms after a day working together on the ranch. The quiet conversations with Riley by the fire each evening, sharing dreams that continued to grow alongside their love. On their 10th anniversary, Riley gave her a handcrafted album containing photographs she had taken throughout their years together, alongside his written reflections on each image. The final page held the first photograph she had ever taken of him, looking out over the cattle during that fateful drive. Beneath it, he had written, "You came to photograph the West, but you showed me what truly matters can never be captured, only lived. Thank you for choosing to live it with me." As they stood on the porch of the home they had built together, no longer a half-finished cabin but a thriving ranch with orchards beginning to bear fruit and children's laughter filling the rooms, Penelope thought of how far they had both come from their first meeting. She who had hidden behind her camera to avoid the pain of connection, he who had believed his worth lay solely in the land he could claim and the work he could do. "What are you thinking about?" Riley asked, his arm around her waist, still strong and steady after all these years. "About what you told me that first day," Penelope replied, "that my camera could only capture shadows." Riley chuckled, the sound as warming as it had always been. "Was I right?" Penelope looked out at their land, at their children playing beneath the cottonwoods, at the home they had built together, at the life they had created from nothing but hope and hard work and love. "You were," she admitted, leaning into his embrace. "But you were also wrong, because sometimes when you show someone what exists beyond the frame, they find the courage to step into the picture themselves." Riley pressed a kiss to her temple, his love as steady and true as the Montana land that had brought them together. "I'm mighty glad you did, Penelope Xavier, mighty glad indeed." And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that the greatest truth of the West, of life itself, was not something that could be captured in a photograph, but something that had to be lived with an open heart and the courage to believe in possibilities not yet seen. The end of one story, the continuation of another, framed not by a camera's lens but by love that had transformed them both.